Rift Valley is an open wound in the heart of Africa. A line of fire and water that in a few million years will provoke the fatal rupture of the continent. From Djibouti to Mozambique, the Earth will open to create a drifting world, a runaway of capes, gulfs, and meridians towards the sea, an illusion of a geography in disorder. But this will occur so far in the future that we can still disregard the geologist's recommendations. In the meantime, the Ethiopian section of the Rift Valley confirms its attachment to the mainland as a territory generous with life.
My name is Wendosen Asefa. I'm 28 years old, and although I was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital, I spent most of my life in Cuba, where I studied to become a veterinary surgeon. I am one of the 6,000 children who held a scholarship granted by the Ethiopian government to study in Cuba's some specialty that didn't exist here. Those were difficult years. The war and continuous drought make survival impossible. Somehow, those who left for Cuba felt really privileged. We had the chance of studying and learning the meaning of important words such as dignity and future. Here in Africa, the future is nothing. Only the present is worthy. And without a minimum of conscience of what is to come, progress becomes very difficult.
Two years ago, Wendesen returned to Ethiopia and traveled to the south to practice his profession among the cattle dealer tribes of the river Omo, where his veterinary skills could be more useful. But he has not lost contact with Cuba. Every 2 or 3 months, Wendosen returns to Addis Ababa, where he meets up with his old colleagues. The reunion takes place at the Havana Club, a bar with a deep Caribbean flavor. The Havana Club was born as a consequence of the need the Ethiopian-Cuban people had to feed their memories. They got together, recuperated the music they had brought from Cuba, and found a way to import the rum and other products that could make them feel closer to the island. Every evening, the bar fills with nostalgic people who chat and play domino with a Caribbean passion.
Muchachos, ahora sí. ¿Quién va? Ay, qué
Lo mío sí es grande, compadre. ¿Tú sabes cuánto tiempo estuve en Cuba? Casi 19 años.
19.
Me fui en el 78, me acuerdo, compadre, que era un barco que se llamaba África-Cuba.
Ah, la más grande que tenía Cuba en aquel
En
momento.
aquel momento era nueva, que iba para allá, ¿no?
Sí.
Y nos fuimos para allá, compadre. Y luego nos fuimos para la isla, yo me acuerdo, compadre, aquello era
Maravilloso.
algo diferente, ¿no? Luego me fui para Las Villas a estudiar ingeniería industrial.
La provincia central del país.
Muchacho,
Una
en
de
pelota
las-
éramos los mejores, chicos.
Sí,
En pelota, tú sabes que la pelota me encanta. El dominó, la cerveza, la verga, Coño, eso era bueno, chico. Lo mejor que hay de la villa es el ambiente. Nosotros teníamos un grupo, ¿no? Que todo el mundo andaba junto, que la playa, qué sé yo. Bueno, ahí no existía playa, pero bueno, la playa era un poquito más lejana. Sí. Pero existe la piscina de la universidad, el gimnasio, hacíamos deporte, bailábamos de noche. Que eso era bien, ¿no, coño? Eso es lo más rico que hay en la cuestión esa.
¿Qué pasa, hombre? Ese es el televisor, me hace nervioso. Déjame dar agua ahí. Por donde quiera.
When I stay in the south, I live in Tarmi, a small town quite near to the tribe I work with. I usually get up early, at dawn. That is the moment when the village starts its daily activities.
In the 80s, the communist government of Mijitsu, who dethroned the Emperor Haile Selassie, came to an agreement with Fidel Castro. The sons of some of the fallen during the war could move to Cuba, where they would have the opportunity to study to become graduates at the university. Many of them stayed there. Others emigrated to Europe or the United States. And a number of them came back to work in the administration or to work in agriculture. Now, the best doctors, engineers, and technicians who work in Ethiopia have been educated in Cuba. Wendesen decided to work among the southern tribes, a universe dominated by magic and precariousness, and where it is not at all easy to enter as a white coat sorcerer.
If there is something that you learn when you live abroad, it is to love your country. Before going to Cuba, I was just a boy and had hardly been a few kilometers beyond Addis Ababa. Now it is quite different. Now, during every trip I make between the south and the capital, I take the chance of observing the natural beauties that Ethiopia hides. Those large spaces of wild countryside, which I had always dreamt of. The first time I heard about the Rift Valley, I was 14 and was studying in Cuba. The professor of geography used to tell us that within that enormous fissure, there were many lakes formed by the water that came boiling up from the center of the earth. Lakes and rivers with imagined origin according to the beliefs of the area where there lived such an amount of animals that we could not even begin to imagine. He also told us that someday that fertile and mysterious land would disappear forever. I looked at the map and dreamt of returning to my country in time to see this place before it disappears. Later on, I discovered that I would have time enough indeed, but I never forgot my dream of spending my life here.
According to the geologists, the division of the continent, this fissure that Wendesen was so worried about when he was a child, will take place in 30 million years. They predict that the line of rivers and lakes at the Rift Valley will finally fuse together with the waters of the sea, thus flooding the whole area, as happened in Madagascar. At the Rift Fault, the Earth's cortex is just 25 kilometers deep, and from the inside flow 50,000 liters of hot water every day. The members of the Oromo ethnic group take advantage of the boiling spring water to cook, the tepid water for personal hygiene, and the mild currents to wash clothes. They also use it to ease pains of the body and even of the soul. These waters are said to be medicinal, and in fact they are. Their mysterious origin at the bottom of the world provides them with a secret power which cures everything. The waters of Ziwe Lake are warm and very muddy, which has caused some of its oldest inhabitants, such as the catfish, to develop those long mustaches, to be able to orient themselves correctly through the depths with no visibility. By the banks of the lake, fish are classified, sold, and cooked. The cleaning jobs are shared with the marabu, a clumsy stork which eats meat and is thankful for the morsels thrown to him by the fishermen. Some neighbors of Zaiwei Lake, such as the weaver birds, are only passing through. They make frequent journeys, except during the period of reproduction. The males weave the hanging nests with extravagant acrobatics. Nevertheless, the females will choose only those that are finished the best. These lakes of the Rift Valley have been inhabited since time immemorial, and since the time when man began to behave as such. The Rift Valley is the cradle of the first hominids, and also the starting point for their long trip. A historical trip that started more than 3 million years ago, a genetic trip that generated multiple races, and also a geographic trip that allowed them to reach every corner of the planet. The current Ethiopia is a mosaic of peoples with origins in Europe, Africa, and Asia, who returned to the starting point as if they were pushed by the human influence of nostalgia. They came back to their origins to imagine new combinations, new half-castes of men and women whose land was called Abyssinia, which in the Semitic language means mix of peoples. At the beginning of the 21st century, more than 300 different languages are still spoken in Ethiopia. Today is Sunday, and therefore it is market day in Chencha village. Although the Oromo are the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, here they are frankly a minority compared to the Dorsey and the rest of the populations that surround the village. The variety of attire and languages is intoxicating. The purchase and sale is made switching easily from one language to another, closing the agreement in 2 or 3 different languages. The market is the meeting point, a space to drive away the loneliness of distant houses for a few hours. Meanwhile, the old people enjoy a good pipe of shisha, and women refill plastic bottles with areke, the most popular corn liquor. In the old times, the Dorsey were famous for being brave warriors. Today, they are justly renowned for being skilled weavers. This family is weaving a chamma, the traditional gown worn by the majority of Ethiopian people, and that is one of the few common features among the different ethnic groups. The chammas woven by the Dorsey are the most esteemed and are in demand in the most distant points of the country. The Dorsey are also famous for their architectural skills. They build very stylized houses up to 12 meters high. The shell can be moved from one place to another if convenient, and can also be covered with the most abundant vegetation of the new region.
One of these places that I like to visit most is the Mago National Park. My friend Teddy works there. He also studied biology in Cuba. As he likes animals very much, he asked for a job at the park, and he has been working there for 3 years.
Hey! Hello. ¿Qué tal? Wendesen, ¿cómo anda?
Bien.
Bien. ¿Qué tal?
Bien.
¿Dónde lo pasaste el año nuevo? Está gordito, ¿eh?
¿Cómo están?
Bien, bien. Aquí, ya tú sabes. Ahí currando un poco.
¿Cómo eres?
Bien, tranquilo.
¿Y los animales que tienen?
Mago National Park was created to protect the wild fauna from the poachers who come from Sudan, escaping from war. But Teddy is alone to protect a territory of more than 2,000 square kilometers, and his successes are few and far between.
Teddy calls me frequently to help him solve another big problem he has, which in fact he can try to solve. In this area near the park live the Mursi. Their livestock is constantly attacked by the tsetse fly, which menaces with transmitting the sleep illness to the wild fauna. When this park was created, one of the objectives was to preserve the local fauna from this terrible illness.
Gita, the Mursi chief, has a good relationship with Teddy, and together they have come to an agreement to build this bridge that will allow the livestock to cross during the rainy season. The park grants the money, while the labor is the responsibility of the community. But his is not the only negotiations kept open. The other one is more complex and is related to the dilemma of the clash between tradition and modernity. During the last few months, the Mursi have suffered enormous losses that they attribute to strictly magical reasons. The sorcerers have acted, but their resources are diminishing, and the livestock continues to die. Gita and Teddy decided to call Wendesen, although they did not enjoy the approval of the whole community.
Our position is an easy one in these matters. For the Mursi, we are all strangers and owners of magic power that they don't understand. But on the other hand, they feel very attracted by this magic. They want to try it and learn how it works.
Gita, the chief, likes to have Teddy and Wendosen visit the village. He takes them to his home and wants to be near them. He also poaches, and his invitation to eat raw antelope meat is a way to involve them in his childish pranks. The Mursi, like the majority of the communities that surround the park, have always dedicated themselves to hunting animals that are now officially protected. Teddy must behave with much diplomacy to play a role in places where very different interests are confronted. The Mursi are not legally authorized to hunt, but alternatives to subsist cannot be offered. Modernity is advancing on them with rules that they cannot respect. Gita has just married for the second time. He had to pay 45 cows for the marriage dowry of his young wife. The price is high. The plate that Yadi carries on her lips is big, and a big plate equals a big marriage dowry. There are no definite explanations about the origin of this habit. Some think that they started to use the plate with the aim of making themselves less attractive to the slave traders of the olden times. Other theories, more plausible, attribute this custom to a merely ornamental purpose.
When I was studying in Cuba, the professor told us stories about Africa, and it was in those classes and those books where I learned about the great nature my country was hidden. It was there that I heard for the first time about the crocodile of the Nile, Sid measured of the pure muscle that make him one of the most frightening predator machines on the earth. When nostalgia invaded me, I don't know why, but I didn't think about my family or my friends in Addis Ababa. When that occurred, I imagined myself running along the lakes and the mountains, which we talked about in class, and was living among the fishermen, feeling very close to the smell of wild animals. It was a strange kind of nostalgia, somehow a nostalgia about the future. I was feeling sad about that wish. I remember that I cried and gritted my teeth as if demanding destiny to make my dream come true.
Wendesen finally made his dream come true, that strong desire to live in the country. Ethiopia has an eccentric, elaborate, and overflowing beauty. Ethiopia is a caprice that the gods have granted themselves. Live nature, a harsh land inhabited by men who walk the paths that have always been there. Men like the Konso, people full of an overwhelming energy whose origin is unknown. Nobody knows where they came from or when they arrived, but everybody agrees that they are very hard-working people. When they settled here, they were nomadic warriors, but as time passed, they became sedentary farmers and ranchers. They have taken advantage of a steep and hostile land. They sow their crops in spread-out terraces that are reinforced with walls, which they also use for surrounding the shacks, thus preventing animals from entering. The Konso villages are large, some of them reaching up to 2,000 inhabitants. The walls and general aesthetics of the constructions give us the image of people of simple and orderly tastes who won the special prize for work that the UNESCO regularly grants. The Konso have a past as fighters that still remains in the collective subconscious of the population, mainly in that of the eldest. Those were intertribal conflicts that the young people have not known. However, no one forgets their ancestors, and to honor them they build wooden figures called waga, which can be seen in the cemeteries and on roads. This way, the deceased are near their families and participate in the daily existence of the living people, although in a symbolic way. Dead people are always present and act in everyday life, either giving their advice or punishing people. The social organization of the Konso is very different from that of the rest of the tribes in the social setting. In their world, the concepts of group and solidarity are followed through to the final consequences. Private life scarcely exists. Every act or thought of the individual has one objective: to comply with the community. By sunset, once the work is finished, they all join together under the shade of their shacks to play cards or just to chat. There are many Africas. This is one of them. Perhaps it is one of the most real and profound. A hard-working and compassionate Africa, responsible for its own concept of time. A continent that loves language.
The village of Murel doesn't appear on the maps, It is a place in far remote. Here lives my friend Síguenos, with whom I share my years of studying in Cuba. He has lived in the south for a short time. He asked for the job of surgeon in this lost place, and he was admitted immediately. There are few people ready to live with such discomfort.
Síguenos is worried about the sudden death of the fish in Lake Corcho. He also takes the chance to ask Wendesen about 2 orphan lions that he found caged upon his arrival in Murele. Poachers shot the mother of these lions, and consequently both have lived in captivity since they were cubs. Síguenos does not want to release them in a rash way, as he doubts their ability to adapt themselves to life in the wild, but neither does he intend to sell them to a zoo.
No, no todavía. Pero tienen tiempo de edad. Sí. ¿Habrá posibilidades para entender como si es veterinario en Jinca o en Argomento?
On their way to the village of the Caro, Wendesen and Síguenos remember some anecdotes about the years when they lived in Cuba and talk about the projects they intend to develop in this area. Upon their arrival in the village, the children celebrate the visit quite noisily, but both of them know that not everybody will be as happy. The problems and contradictions of the Caro are very similar to those of the Mursi.
Serrano, film Serrano.
The Caro community is composed of scarcely 1,000 members. This community is the one under the highest risk of extinction. A simple epidemic or even a conflict with more numerous and aggressive tribes could mean their disappearance. Waka, the chief of the village, has been expecting their visit for several days. He tells them about the misfortune suffered by his people, and also that the fishes in the lake were dying because the lake spirits are angry. There is nothing but bad omens. Waka is not at all afraid of men, but indeed he is afraid of the spirits. Síguenos has had difficulties in persuading the Caro to accept Wendosen's visit. He initially had the same feeling of rejection. Soon after his arrival, a sorcerer told him that only the man who sits under the tree knows what the black ant of the tree eats. The next day, he found a poisonous snake near his bed. However, little by little, Wendesen has got the majority of people to trust him, and consequently, they allow him to vaccinate the children and take care of the ill, who call on him when they do not feel well. The case of the dead fish required an argument that was won by those who accepted Wendosen's visit. On their walk to the pool, Wendesen and Síguenos pass along the banks of the river Omo, one of the largest in Ethiopia, more than 1,000 kilometers long. But the same as many other African rivers, it never reaches the sea. The first Western person who proved to have traveled the entire length of it was an Italian named Vittorio Bottego. He proved it in 1897. Since then, and for several decades, few white people dared to go along the river's banks. It was not an attractive territory from the economic point of view, nor were there any routes passing through it that opened the doors to the great geographic discoveries. In recent years, however, tour operators have chosen the River Omo and the ethnic groups living by this river to organize anthropological safaris. Nowadays, the Mursi, the Karo, or the Hammer make regular contact with the outside world. The Karo have not dared to accompany them for fear of the water spirits. Little by little, a group of young people who feel more curiosity than fear get close to them. Wendesen confirms the suspicions that Siyun already had. The water level of the River Omo is low, and the little water that has arrived has a low content of oxygen. That is the reason for the fish's death, whether the smallest, such as the carp, or the big perch of the Nile, which can weigh up to 100 kilos. One of the chief's youngest sons is listening to the explanations very attentively. Later on, this child will be involved in the difficult task of explaining to the rest of the people that the cause for this death has nothing to do with the lake spirits, but with much more mundane problems. However, the discussion will not end at that point. Some will still back the local sorcerers, while others will prefer to believe in the sorcerer who came from the north. After all, regardless of who is right, there will be just one thing to do: wait.
For centuries, these people I'm working with have not known any advance or innovation apart from that of the clouds in the rain season. Death and common misfortune that regularly affect them are natural circumstances that they must accept with resignation. The concept of progress doesn't exist, and the fact of trying to overcome the illness with foreign magic is an aberration.
In spite of the difficulties that Wendosen has to face, he is determined to achieve his objectives. The most important thing is to get permission to vaccinate the livestock. If in the next 3 years premature deaths decreased by 10%, in no time the number of cattle would be multiplied by 2. Consequently, they could have better nourishment and also would count on better economic resources obtained from the sale of the surplus. Figures do not lie, but the hardest problem they must solve is not to make the numbers work, but others that concern metaphysics more than science. Any small detail, such as an unforeseen death or a bad crop, will be attributed to the new sorcerers, and many months of work will be rendered useless.
Of all the tribes I work with, maybe the Hammer are those whom I feel closer to. I couldn't explain the reason why, but it is so. One of the things I learned in Cuba is the value of community and mutual help. And the Hammer are experts in survival thanks to the triumph of the collective over the individual.
The Hammers are a nomadic tribe with a population of about 30,000 people. They live from the cultivation of sorghum, millet, and cotton, and also raise domestic animals. They are mainly known for their skill in decorating their own bodies and the strong level of symbolism contained in these ornaments. The number of earrings a man wears shows the number of women he owns. The metal necklaces worn by women are obtained when they marry and represent the prestige of the husband. Single women wear a plait woven into their hair. This is a world of coded messages in which Wendesen moves with skill. Bodo, the chief of the village, is the nexus that links Wendesen with the universe of the Hammers. He understands Wendosen's intentions and tries to explain these to the rest of the community. In spite of living on two different planets, there exists a strange complicity between them. Bodo does not think that Wendosen's presence represents an insult to the ancient established order, nor to the ancestors' wills. But not everyone thinks alike. Bodo admits that the invocation of the spirits has not served to avoid the death of the cows, and therefore trusts in succeeding with the medicine of the veterinarian. He has had to persuade the Council of Elders so that they accept the examination to be carried out by Wendesen. In the past, he convinced them of the need to vaccinate children against polio, and the results were quite good. All the cows show incisions on the skin that have been made with knives. These incisions form symbolic shapes that are supposed to protect the animal against the evil eye. This time, they have not been effective. Wendesen goes ahead with his examination, knowing quite well that he is being thoroughly observed. For the Hammers, the survival of their animals is not just an economic matter. They are linked to these animals from the very day that they are born. Every child born is baptized with 3 names, his own, and also one of a calf and a kid goat, which were born during those days as well. The Hammers' vocabulary, although not very rich in other aspects, has 20 words to differentiate the colors of animal skins. Wendesen already has his diagnosis and asks for some help to administer the medicines. He knows that the effects will not be immediate, but he trusts Bodo's persuasion skills to convince them to be patient. Luck has been on their side. A goat is born while Wendesen is in the village, and that is a good sign.
Bodo's position is quite difficult. He knows that this is what he must do, but very often this means confronting the rest of the people. For several weeks, the cows have been dying, as no remedy has worked to stop this death. Bodo is risking his prestige with me, and if I fail, he will also suffer the decrease of his power within the community. In fact, those who are most against my presence will even prefer to see the cows dead than to accept my assistance.
What the day brings, the night takes away. It's always been like that, and so it will continue to be. The night in Africa does not announce a new time, but the beginning of time, a time with no beginning or end, a continuous evolution in the deepest heart of their dream of being alive. The African night is as simple as a grain of sand. It is an open jaw to the adventure of the absurd. It is like a sea of death and nostalgia, a labyrinth of recovered life. The ancient music and songs are playing, sounds that seem like dark fits of rage, the remains of the eternal memory of man. African night, wind, fire, snow, the truth of the world in an instant. For a long time, the Hammers have been big consumers of honey. They were hunters until quite recently. They attacked the wild beehives and took possession of the booty, demolishing the honeycomb. Nowadays, they prefer to domesticate the bees and build inside empty tree trunks their own beehives that hang from the acacias surrounding their homes. As a consequence of this, they obtain a sustained production that allows them to have honey during the whole year.
One of the people responsible for the change in their procedure of obtaining honey is a friend of mine called Tesfaye. He is also a veterinarian surgeon like me and also studied in Cuba. There, he learned about technique that he's trying to introduce to the hammers.
Oh, yes. No.
The first thing Tesfaye did upon his arrival in Cuba was to carry out a study to adapt these techniques to the terrain requirements and to the cultural peculiarities of the hammers. Later on, he searched for the support of an NGO which would finance the project, and so he started with his work. Tesfaye found the people divided, as happens with the rest of communities where the technicians who studied in Cuba work on alternative production procedures. He explains to them what this technique consists of, and little by little, the whole community puts it into practice.
እዛኛው ላይ ደግሞ ብዙ ኪሎ ግራም ነው የሚገኘው እና ያንን እናነጻጽራለን እና በኋላ ምን እናደርጋለን ሀመር ይሄንን ካወቀ በኋላ የዚህን ልዩነት ካወቀ በኋላ
In traditional honeycombs, bees use between 7 and 11 kilos to build the cells, thus leaving just 1 kilo to be collected. Tesfaye proposes an apiculture procedure with more mobility by adapting independent panels from the beehive. By being able to extract the frameworks, the honey is taken from the cells without extracting honeycomb from the panels, thus making it possible to multiply the production of honey by 7.
Hello?
A few years ago, the amount of honey collected barely covered domestic needs. Now they can sell a part of the production, which is continually growing. In the market, there is sufficient demand for the hammers to consider making the sale of honey one of their main sources of income. Wendesen and Tesfaye go to the market as well. They want to check the weight and quality of the honey being sold. Their final objective is to convince the chiefs of other tribes to gradually become involved in Tesfaye's project. The market is at the peak of its activity. Hammer women seem to observe with an absent and indifferent air, but in fact, they do not miss any details about the clothes or coiffures worn by the women from other tribes. The men also take care of their appearance and help one another to shine their ornaments. The market is open during the whole day. The majority of people have walked for several hours to arrive here, and some of them even during the entire day. Nobody wants to return with the same weight as they were carrying on their arrival at the market. This means that, mainly in the evening, the merchandise must be sold at prices much lower than the ones quoted in the morning. By that time, when people coming from the most distant villages have already started their return trip, some people prolong the day's journey in the bar. They drink mead, a liquor obtained from the fermentation of honey at more than 18 degrees, first with the honey's own water content, and afterwards with the water they add to it. It was a very esteemed drink in medieval Europe, but it was already in Africa many centuries before. We could say that mead is one of the first liquors invented by man.
Bikollos, bikollos.
ብርዝ ነው ብርዝ ጥሩ አየኔ ብርዝ ጥሩ
Africa dances. She has been dancing for centuries. It is a dance which sounds like sorrow and hope. In the half-light of rhythm, bodies twist like adolescent rain, like the flower of a sorcerer who recites false poems of love. Music plays, and Africa dances. There is no need to speak. Their looks and gestures speak for them.
Sometimes I don't know where I am from. When I was living in Cuba, I used to dream about going back to my country. I missed something that I did not really know. Now, I remember those years and feel as if a part of me has stayed on that island. This doesn't mean that I want to go back. It is rather that I feel as if I were still there. That is why I only come back to this place, because here I recuperate Cuba's smells, the sounds that take me back to the nights in Havana. It is a strange feeling to belong to two places and feel that time goes by without really knowing where you are from.